Welcome to Let's Talk About Love Stories from Everywhere. I'm your host, Jill Ferguson, and today my guest is attorney Tarin Hale. How are you today?
I'm well, Jill. How are you?
Good. And you're coming from Ohio in this?
Yes,
This
I
one?
live just
Yeah.
outside of Dayton, Ohio, in a
Okay.
little suburb.
And what type of law have you practiced? Because I believe your law practice has changed over time.
Yes, to say the least, I grew up in a small town. I grew up Northeast Ohio in a small town. My parents were teachers, and my dad worked at the welfare department, eventually the unemployment office. And I just had a very conventional view of the world. And so when I started out with the idea of being a small town lawyer. I moved to a different small town after law school.
And by a small town lawyer, you mean one that practiced like family law and whatever people needed, right?
Yes, a kind of general practitioner of all sorts, and kind of, but within the town, I kind of did a little niche here and there with a firm. And eventually landing on, kind of through default, I ended up being a public defender, part-time public defender, and part-time general practice attorney in the small town. That led to a kind of my initial claim to fame was a 1999 murder case involving a 12-year-old who was falsely accused of murdering a neighbor girl. And it really, it was I call it a modern day To Kill a Mockingbird, and it was very challenging. And we were railroaded through a juvenile court system. The story was actually featured on ABC 2020 in a 2-hour special like a few years ago, even as an update. And after that case, though, it wasn't my small town, and it was everyone I was fighting against, the prosecutor, the judge, the police. It was their small town. So after that case, we got railroaded through the juvenile system, but then we were successful on appeal to get a private firm to do the appeal. But I had to leave, and I left. I took the first bus I could find getting out of town. My poor family, 4 children, and my wife who went with us, and we end up in kind of trying to find a way. And I eventually ended up in Dayton, Ohio. I had trial experience, so I was hired in by a firm that said that they wanted a trial lawyer, and then they proceeded to kind of put me in an office for doing insurance defense work. And I couldn't handle being in an office, confinement, not being in the courtroom was kind of troublesome. And it also, I was kind of scarred from the murder case.
Yeah.
Although we were successful on appeal, it was still really just a bad taste in your mouth.
Well, what did you learn about the legal system through all that you didn't know going into it, right?
It was, I was very, you learn that some people just aren't very bright, and that they don't understand facts, and it becomes very political in a way.
Yeah.
I was really disappointed that the juvenile court judge, I had actually ran for prosecutor in 1996. And so the person I was up against in the prosecution was my opponent, and we were very different people. And I thought I had a lot more credibility and a lot more education around these issues, let's say. And it was a clear choice. The judge it was either pick my story, which was he was innocent and didn't do it, or pick this story, the fact that he was a false confession, therefore you run with it even though there's no evidence. And I really had thought the judge would have picked my side based upon our history together, and it just became, arbitrarily she picked the wrong team as far as I'm concerned. And it just made you feel like what power do you have? I was even the election. I thought I was very disappointed with the outcome of the election, because I thought I was really in a groove. I really thought I was kind of following Spirit's guide, and it didn't go well. And so it was kind of 2 hard knocks that left me spiraling. And I ended up in Dayton, Ohio, and trying to rebuild myself, and it didn't work. I went through 2 or 3 jobs, very challenging. difficult situations that I eventually, in 2009, I was ready to give up. I had just hit the wall. And it was very, very challenging.
When you say give up, do you mean give up on law or give up on life or all of the above kind of thing?
I was ready to give up on life. I was done. It's like you waking up every day and just getting kicked in the head. And I would get in my car. I would try so hard. Like, today's gonna be different. I had about a 20-minute drive to downtown. And it's like, as soon as I hit the office door, 3 different offices, maybe 4 different offices where I was working, and everything just blew up. And I don't understand it. But and I was done. I had a life insurance policy of $500,000, and I thought that was probably the best I could do for my family. And I gave myself 6 months. I said, well, let's, worst thing that happens, I leave them the policy after 6 months, but I'll be until then, I'll try whatever I can. And I literally, it was the third job that I literally walked out of in the middle of the day. I just couldn't take it.
Your wife understood how much you were struggling during this time?
She understood, but she was very scared.
Yeah.
She didn't know. She felt very vulnerable. The job I had before the last one, I got up almost, I had for several years, and then I got up almost every day and told her I was going to quit. I mean, every day was like, I'm going to quit today. I'm going to quit today. It was like I was just trying to get by one more day. And so she was very vulnerable. I was the primary breadwinner, 4 children in school, and it was very hard. When I quit the last job, she was working part-time at the library, and she understood that I was at my last rope. Just tell me one more bill we had to pay, one more problem that we had, and I was ready to go. And she went to work and told her employer, I need a full-time position, and they accommodated her in a very beautiful way. And her career really took off at that point.
That's wonderful.
I was looking, I had an in with alternative energy companies. One was kind of a wind company. One was a solar. I learned solar installation. I helped install the solar panels on top of the Toledo Art Museum as part of my apprenticeship with a group up there. Just really trying to, and at that time, solar power was based upon tax credits.
Yeah.
And then once the market crashed, the whole industry just kind of folded for a period of time. And I was right back starting over again. And luckily, within that period of time, some people reached out to me. I had gone, after my last job, I went and sought counseling. They did testing on me. They diagnosed me with ADHD. They said I had severe depression, anxiety. I was on 3 different medications, and just trying to get by.
But so that was a number of years ago, and you clearly figured out a way to get by.
Yes.
Talk to me a little bit about that.
In the midst of the chaos.
I don't mean to make light of the situation you were in at all, because that's, I mean, once you hit kind of rock bottom, there's very few directions to go, right? You either go up or you don't.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah. And I can't emphasize enough. I mean, it was so painful. I mean, at one point I had a migraine, and this migraine was the worst headache I ever had in my life. And in some ways it reminded me of that depression. Just, it's like, no matter where you go, I call it the dark black hole depression, where there's no light. Everything just goes bad, and there's no good thought. So in that period of time, a friend suggested I try a shamanic plant medicine retreat, and it sounded just absolutely crazy. Although my mother raised us with alternative, holistic, herbal and vitamins, supplements. It just sounded a little too far out there. But I was in such a state, like, how can I say no at this point? My 6 months was coming up to an end. And then during that time, I really became aware that I felt my children needed me. But more importantly, I needed whatever was affecting me, whatever was troubling me, they had the same kind of sensitivity. And if I were to leave, it would be a bigger scar on them than whatever I could do trying to fix it. And so that became my focus. Like, I have to find a way.
Like that's a really important realization, right? Because there's a lot of people don't consider the people around them when they make choices like that. All they see is their pain and the darkness and want to get out of that, right?
Yeah.
So the fact that you even, had the wherewithal in those dark moments to think, how is this going to affect my family? It says a lot, right? And it's, was probably, I would say, maybe spirit guiding you, but
definitely spirit guiding me. That's for sure. But it really was. It became very profound, and it became the point where I can't burden them with that.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever's burdening me, they have the sensitivity, the some of the insights. They had that already. They did not need to compound that with the loss of a father and me giving up on them and me giving up on life. And I read a book. It was interesting. I found this book about sensitive people in China.
Mm-hmm.
They were talking about how sensitive people in China are really respected. They're seen as the seers, the visionaries.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at our society in this country, we're sensitive people are beaten. They're not respected. We live in a dog eat dog kind of competitive world where the only thing that matters is the bottom line. Mm-hmm. And I looked at that and I just said, there's a reason why we're here. Sensitive people have the right to exist. There's a reason why we're here. I have to figure this out. I have to figure out something that makes sense for me and something I can share with my children. So I had the offer to go to this event. Mm-hmm. Had no idea what it would be. But I knew that whatever it was, I had to try it. And it completely changed my life. In order to participate, I had to quit my medications. I was on Zoloft, Lexapro, and Adderall, and I quit them all cold turkey 2 weeks before. And I went to this ceremony, and it showed my world upside down. Instead of that black hole, it showed me just this beautiful, serene experience of life. And really to appreciate how lucky we are to be here. That wherever we came from, we don't have this physical experience. We don't get to move around and feel the wind in the hair and the sunlight and to interact with each other. So just being born is winning the lottery and to really embrace that part of it. The scarcity, the negativity I saw was like looking through the wrong end of a telescope. It's like, no, there's a vast world out there. And it can be enjoyed. And it doesn't, you don't have to get on that rat race. You don't have to get on that competition scale that someone else is driving, but just have to find your inner motivation, find your inner soul, and follow that bliss, as Joseph Campbell told us. And it was, it also showed me, more profoundly, it showed me some trauma that I had experienced as a very young, perhaps toddler, and how that impacted the way I saw things and the way I viewed life, and that there was a way to let go of that, a way to release it. And it was really transformative. At the time, my wife and I were barely talking to each other, and the last thing she wanted to hear was that I was going to be going out of town to attend this event and leaving her with 4 children, plus she had started the full-time position and was starting school to get her master's in library science. But I had to do it. And she knew we never really talked about exactly what all she was thinking at the time, but she knew. She knew I was not well. But it transformed my life, and it opened a new whole world, and I pursued it. And in pursuing it, I also was invited to participate as a lawyer in looking at how this work has a legal footing under religious accommodation and spiritual religious practice. And that was a whole new world that opened up to me.
So even as you were installing solar panels and stuff, you still kept up your law license and.
Yes, I kept a law license. I had a doctor who I did a bunch of testing, and they came back and they diagnosed the ADHD. One of the therapists, doctors I was talking to at the time, he said there's no way you could be a lawyer with your mental health issues. He said, your ADHD was significant enough that it would be very difficult for you. But what he doesn't understand is being a trial lawyer, it really was an asset. I just couldn't get to do that work. But I kept up my license because it is it's something that I've always respected. I've always, since I was very small, my father would kind of imprinted on me very strongly the idea of basically being a doctor or a lawyer, and I was taking towards blood and biology. So, and I watched Perry Mason. I watched To Kill a Mockingbird. I really identify with being the champion for the small guy, and that was very much part of my life. And I've always wanted to see what I could do with it. And so it really dovetailed very well for me to step into this, this new world, and then bring my little legal skills to it.
That's what I was just going to say. This is like, right. Getting psychedelic medicines to be understood by the masses under religious freedom is another one of those uphill battles law battles that you've kind of fought in the past in other contexts.
Yes, I mean it's changed over the years. I mean I've been doing this now for over 15 years, and it really it started with a Supreme Court case involving the UDV Church, an ayahuasca church out of New Mexico, and they were using the sacrament of ayahuasca, which contains a compound of DMT, which is a scheduled substance. And do they have the legal right to use a scheduled substance as part of their lineage under the laws of the United States? And ended up the U.S. Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said yes. There was an earlier case, the Smith case, was a drug counselor out of Oregon who went and it was a Native American and sat with the peyote ceremony. He was fired from work because they had a policy of not allowing you to use any controlled substance while you're employed there. He filed for unemployment and was denied. In that case, went up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court found that his religious freedom was not protected under the First Amendment, because the law itself said that the policy was neutral with respect to religion. They found it wasn't protected by the First Amendment. And in response to the Smith case, the Congress passed the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993. And it specifically cited the Smith case and said, well, if the First Amendment, according to the Supreme Court, isn't covered, we're going to make it covered by this act. And therefore, they applied what they call a strict scrutiny application of the law, saying that the government has to show a compelling interest and show the least restrictive means of enforcing it, which they felt would have protected Smith. I don't want to get into too much of the legal jargon, perhaps, but so then when the UDV case came, they found under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act that the group was entitled to use ayahuasca. A unanimous decision that was supported by several major churches in amicus briefs. The right to use this substance as part of their religious spiritual practice, and that really was a seminal case that kind of opened the door for what we're seeing now as part of the psychedelic renaissance with religious freedom.
But yet part of that isn't necessarily being followed by law enforcement, right? Because people are still getting arrested for practicing their religion in these kinds of ways.
It's really interesting to, what I see, in my research that I've done, what I found was essentially, the courts were in the 80s and 90s, the courts were confronted with many, to be blunt, drug dealers. They were marijuana drug dealers, hundreds of pounds of marijuana, and they got caught. And then they said, "Oh, we're a church."
Yeah.
And there was a real lack. There was no sincerity involved, and it was haphazard. They couldn't really explain what their religion was. They really couldn't detail any of it, and it was just very clearly just a ruse to try to get out of it. Mm-hmm. And you could also feel in reading the cases, I felt, the courts hate cannabis. I mean, these judges. It's almost like I could see them talking to their 18-year-old son and trying to tell, no, it's not. You don't have the right to do this. It's dangerous and all this, reefer madness and sensationalism. So they did, and so the religious freedom right was really watered down or not given full value because it was being presented in a way that wasn't honorable, frankly. And then thankfully, we've had in the past, past couple of years especially, we've had some very insightful judges who have more of an understanding of the peyote use of a sacrament. And this is where we have the psilocybin churches are very, many of them across the country have popped up, as well as the ayahuasca churches. And I certainly believe, from my experiences, ayahuasca and psilocybin are going to bring you into a spiritual experience in the proper set and setting and in the proper preparation and context. The likelihood of having a spiritual experience exceeds 90%. I have never found marijuana, and in the research, I just don't see where marijuana has that kind of impact. Mm-hmm. It has lots of benefits for some people, but you're not having, and out of 100 people, maybe 4 or 5 would tell you it was a spiritual type experience. I would say that with psilocybin and ayahuasca, you take 100 people, 95 of them are going to tell you it was a spiritual experience, connecting them to a higher intelligence, if not God framework. So that nature has changed, and we've seen some very positive cases coming out of that renewed understanding.
Mm-hmm. And you, I mean, we've labeled those like ayahuasca and psilocybin and peyote, right, as hallucinogens. And so what you're saying is that you're not hallucinating.
Yeah.
Right.
We call them entheogens. Yeah. Entheogens coming into God, coming into connection with God.
I was using the DEA language, right? But yeah, so there's a difference between you're making this all up or seeing it and it's in your head, as opposed to you're getting in touch with the creator. And
yes. Well, what we've seen, there's kind of 3 different groups right now that are kind of distinguishing themselves as we go through this renaissance. MAPS is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, founded in 1986 by Rick Doblin, with the particular goal of the fact that at that time therapists on the coast, primarily in the Bay Area, perhaps, were using MDMA, known as ecstasy on the street at this point, as part of their therapy. And in '86, they outlawed it under the scheduling laws of the federal government, and Rick made it his goal to get pharmaceutical approval of MDMA for therapy. And they've invested hundreds of millions of dollars in doing all the procedures and the testing that's required by the FDA to get that status. And they're very close finally now, 40 years later, to getting there. And so that's kind of the medical model. The idea that you would go see a licensed therapist, you would have a product that was being manufactured. And they've done a lot of research, and that research has been very promising in terms of showing that they're not hallucinating. They've done research with psilocybin, MDMA, marijuana, even LSD.
Well, and ketamine is a big one right now for therapy reasons.
Yeah, ketamine kind of ran on its own. It kind of popped up as a little stepchild or something, a part of the process. But in terms of the research that we've seen on those other areas, it's very clear they're not hallucinating. These people are having profound experiences. And again, a although marijuana is also researched in terms of some PTSD issues and anxiety, it being helpful, they're not quite entheogen properties of the other ones. So we use that research but clearly throughout all of it is the fact that the scheduling was unconstitutional in the sense that they are not dangerous, they're not addictive, and they're not threatening to people. There was a famous study that was done in terms of the dangerous compounds out there, substances, and the worst is alcohol in terms of the physical and the mental and the societal problems that it causes. It's way above anything else. And psilocybin is one of the least problematic. And with no toxicity level, there's no way to really cause harm itself to your physical body by taking it. And that's been very helpful. And that's all kind of lumped in what we call the medical model. Then you have the decrim movement that kind of grew up out of kind of the you would say the hippie model, just back to nature, the freedom to do what you want with your, and the right to do what you want with your body and ingest these things that are not dangerous, shouldn't have been scheduled, and the right to ingest things that you can grow in your backyard. And it's kind of it's a very liberal, open idea. And I didn't quite really understand it. It was really, coming out of Denver with the idea based on a model that was used for marijuana. And the model was that our courts and our prisons or jails and are just wasting a lot of resources over a substance, cannabis, that is not nearly deserving this much attention. And so we should decriminalize it, get these people out of jail, get them referred to help or whatever else, but to just get this off the books. That's too much of a burden. And that made sense. And then for reasons that these two gentlemen, Kevin Matthews and I think Mike Duffy, decided to put a ballot on the Denver for psilocybin to decriminalize it. I went out and met with them after it passed. I said, what do you think? I mean, what was the problem you were trying to solve? They said, well, we didn't think it would pass. We thought we were just setting it up for down the road, but it did. And there was nobody in jail for psilocybin of any number, and there were not prosecutions, but it caught on. And then we saw that Oakland passed a decrim for all kinds of entheogens beyond psilocybin. And that's been growing up. Now Larry Norris he has a nonprofit Decriminalize Nature, which is going around and helping to organize local cities and municipalities to provide decrim. And while I didn't understand it at the time, in 2022, I was aware of a nurse in Indiana. Jessica was a nurse in Indiana in her early 40s, 20 years of anxiety, depression, including a suicide attempt. And she had 4 children under the age as minors. Recently, post-divorce, still struggling, trying to figure out how to make ends meet, how to be productive, and she wasn't doing well. And a friend suggested she try microdosing psilocybin. She read the studies from Johns Hopkins and NYU. She even read up about the protocols by Paul Stamets and Jim Fadiman. And she decided that maybe before killing herself, kind of similar to where I was, maybe she should try this. And she felt the safest thing to do as a nurse was rather than going on the street trying to find it, was to grow it your own. And growing mushrooms is like growing zucchini. You get 1 or 100, and you never know. She was very successful, and she was successful in her growing, and she was successful in her microdosing, and it saved her life. Unfortunately, a ex-family member called the police and reported her for growing mushrooms. And they came out in hazmat suits and removed her little grow operation, found that she had over 27 grams of mushrooms as they weigh them, weighing fresh mushrooms. And under the draconian law there, that made her a drug trafficker of a Schedule I substance. She was facing 30 years in prison or more for growing mushrooms.
And she wasn't even selling them.
Wasn't selling them, wasn't even distributing them. She was just using them to microdose to save her life, to treat anxiety and depression, which was following the studies out of NYU and Johns Hopkins. And I was, luckily I was able to jump in there. She had a lawyer. She had a plea agreement to serve 10 years in prison on a 15-year sentence. That was her plea agreement. And I jumped in. We got her a new lawyer. I'm not licensed in Indiana, so I wasn't able to represent her myself. We got experts from across the country, including Jim Fadiman, to write letters of support of microdosing, explaining it. We got the charge reduced to 1 count of possession, still a felony, and a 90 days house arrest and a 1.5 year probation. And once she finished her probation, she was eligible to have it reduced to a misdemeanor, which was granted by the judge. And she's now forming a decrim Arkansas program. She left Indiana, where she felt like she was being still treated as a criminal, and much more embraced and more open-minded Arkansas area of this.
Was she able to keep her license?
She got her license reinstated. It was that's another whole can of worms that she had opened. But she really, for me, she solidified the decrim movement. That's what decriminalization is about. It's about the right to try something that you read about, that's safe, that's not toxic. You're not harming anybody. You're growing it in your backyard or in your house. And why, and that's what decrim is about. So I finally, that's when I got it. I believe she's like the poster child for decrim. And then the third element, or the third area of the Renaissance, is what I call the religious freedom issue. And again, it was born out of the UDV case. The UDV case, it was had a sister case with the Santo Daime out of Oregon, both of which ended in the favor of the churches to be able to use ayahuasca as a sacrament. It was odd, the UDV case was decided in 2006, and it just kind of sat there for the most part. No one really there was not a lot of litigation afterwards, and it really was kind of like even the government wasn't sure what to do with it. Both of those cases involved millions of dollars in attorney's fees on both sides. The government had to pay $1 million of attorney's fees for losing those cases. So we weren't sure what was going to happen. But I believe it was the 90s, after the Santo Daime case, the DEA came out with a guidance policy, basically saying that if you want to be a psychedelic church and you want to be exempt from the scheduled substance, you can file an application with us. Tell us who you are, where you are, what you're doing, who you're doing it with, and then stop doing it while we review your application to decide whether or not we are going to grant you, an exemption. And it was completely stacked. It sounded so bogus on its face. Basically admitting and inviting them, admitting a felony of trafficking, admitting 30 years prison sentence, and then we're going to decide whether or not we're going to grant your exemption or prosecute you, is what it felt like.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just ridiculous. We had everything was quiet in 2016 then. So the UDV and the Santo Daime cases actually started from a raid of their churches in '99, and it took them until 2006 to resolve the Supreme Court case. In 2016, the DEA, I used to go on the internet and I would try to look for who's doing anything, and I found there were 3 churches at that time that were advertising on the internet. And 2 of them, one was USA Ayahuasca in Washington State, and then there was Soul Quest down in Florida. And they both got letters from the DEA telling them to cease and desist. Now, in 1999, the government raided the UDV and Santo Daime churches with a SWAT team and automatic weapons. They brought people in for questioning, but did not bring any charges. So eventually the churches themselves sued the government and got the exemption. In 2016, rather than a SWAT team, they got letters in the mail. So that perhaps was a victory by itself. Ayahuasca USA, they also referred to the guidance procedure to file their application. Ayahuasca USA did that. on their own, and kind of abandoned it and moved to Mexico after they filed it. SoulQuest got a real lawyer to represent them and filed their application, which the DA did nothing with. And finally, in 2019 or 2020, SoulQuest filed suit against the government for not acting on their application. And then it opened up a whole new story about where the DA showed up, asked that they stay any litigation while they rule on their application. And after reviewing it, they found that SoulQuest was not compliant with what they felt to be a church, and denied their exemption. It subsequently went on appeal, but in the meantime, tragically, a young man attended a ceremony at SoulQuest and died from apparently drinking too much water during a combo, a frog venom ceremony, and died. And that ended up in a civil suit. And the SoulQuest eventually lost the civil suit and was facing a $10 or $15 million judgment, and it put them out of business before they were actually able to resolve the appeals on their exemption request. And so this has been part of my world ever since. I work with people who are looking to pursue opening a church or a religious practice. I also help anybody who's been charged with possession or use of these substances that are doing so in a way that matches my feeling of sincerity around a religious practice as well. In the past couple of years, we've had some success. I'm using the term in terms of the community of this network. We've had 2 churches who similarly filed suit against the government. Under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, the strict scrutiny test I talked about, it provides 2 avenues of action. One is, if you are being harassed by the government, you can sue them to get the government to stop and to have your rights acknowledged. And that's what was done in the UDV and the Santo Daime case. The second prong is that if you're being charged criminally, you can raise as a defense your religious practice. And so a few years ago, in the early 2020, 21, we had a couple of churches who were basically, their ayahuasca churches, harassed by the government, having their shipments intercepted, and they filed suit under the harassment section. The second church was filed suit under both. They were facing criminal charges, so it was a defense as well as the harassment. And they both were successful through litigation to get a settlement with the government to allow for their use of ayahuasca. The third church recently out of Washington State, they actually followed the application process with the DEA and were just a year ago granted their status. So they're the first one to get status from the DEA without having to litigate.
And how long did it take their process?
I believe it was over 2 years.
Okay. So it's not like you're applying and they're responding in a timely manner.
No, not at all. In 2024, in May of 24, the GAO, the Government Accounting Office, issued a report, and it found that in their audit of the DEA exemption policy, of the 24 people who applied, 0 had been granted at that point, 8 of which were psilocybin churches. And they even noted in the report that psilocybin has a history, a lineage of being used in spiritual religious contexts. And they were kind of chiding the DEA to do something to get these products, make it more fair, make it more open. And we haven't really had an official response that I've seen from the DEA. When I spoke with the lawyer who was involved with the church out of Washington State, like, how did this happen? She referred to it mostly coming from the local DEA office. Their local office seemed to be very cooperative and friendly and not antagonistic. And so it wasn't clear that it was a policy from on top that had changed, but just the local office that was being favorable. And it really is. Let me just say, it's interesting because, like I was talking about before about the marijuana cases, if you can approach this from the Native American use of peyote spiritual context, you see how this is, absolutely, should be protected as part of it. If you come from the recreational use of drugs context, you can feel how people are not willing to understand it, and that's the bridge that I'm trying to fill, and making people understand the religious context.
And I think there's an important part that we haven't stated specifically, right? Which is, so many people think like, oh, it's those people on the left coast, right, in Washington, Oregon, California, that are doing this stuff, or the people, in Denver, because Colorado gets a lot of press for being a drug-friendly state, let's call it, right? But the fact of the matter is, we're talking about people exercising their religious freedom to use psilocybin and ayahuasca and peyote in places that are in the Bible Belt. They're in the Midwest. And that's where there's been a whole lot of traction, almost, if you will, right? It's Arkansas, it's Missouri, it's Ohio, Utah. We didn't even talk about the Utah case.
Yes, that's
yeah. and it's places that people might not associate with people using things in religious freedom, right? That aren't, in their normal, we go to a Christian-based church somewhere because our ancestors have, or because we believe in it.
Yes, and you're identifying a lot of things there. So the one, as I mentioned earlier, after Denver passed their decrim for psilocybin, Oakland passed decrim for all ethanogenic plant fungi-based products, including ayahuasca, which really surprised me. But if you go to Oakland and ask somebody, they weren't prosecuting anybody for almost anything at the time anyway. So it was kind of a joke in some ways, like, who cares? And then I'm in Indiana. I'm in small town Indiana, where there's one judge and she's married to the sheriff.
Yeah.
And these people don't understand that.
Yeah.
But you also have I call it the Deepak Oprah effect, where there's the new agey movement also is it was embracing the psychedelics, the entheogens, as part of their practice. And that became more mainstream. You had Michael Pollan write the book, How to Change the Mind, which outlines the work that MAPS had been doing, as well as his own personal experience in doing some of these things, which is kind of keep softening this and making it more mainstream. Rick Doblin will tell you that. I mean, he specifically addressed PTSD with veterans, believing that would be a way to embrace this. Who's going to be against that? But as you embrace this idea that you can use these compounds to help the most extreme cases of PTSD, where our government itself is responsible for inflicting it upon them through their work, you also see that the success of that can apply to your school teachers, your local police, the first responders, the firemen, who should not have access to this. And this is kind of what's being stirred up here. You also have a recently completed, the study was done a few years ago. It recently came out this year, 24 clergy who were given the psilocybin experience. 24 clergy who had no prior experience, recreational or otherwise, with any substances, were given this experience. 96% reporting that the experience was the top 5 religious, spiritual experience in their lives. So that context, the religious context, is starting to open. I had a case in Cincinnati involving a young man who had a 501c3 church. His story was basically, in 2017, he found Jesus. In 2019, Jesus told him to find mushrooms. And this was his spiritual experience. And he was following this, and he was trying to do it the correct way. And then his mushroom grow also got raided under suspicious circumstances. And then he was facing, under Ohio law, mandatory 8 years in prison. And I could not get the public defender. I could not get his lawyer to even approach this question with the judge, because it was just too far off their radar. And they felt like if you go that route, if you're going to fight this, you're going to lose, and you're going to be in prison while your appeals pending. When we can offer you, he got a probation offer of 12 months probation instead. And so I'm fighting that as well. These draconian laws, the punishments are so severe. They're always giving us, they almost always give you an option out that you can't get to court on the religious freedom issue because they stack it against you. It's all or nothing. If you want to fight this, then you're going to have to pay the consequences if you lose. And so this is happening all over the place. And so you're getting the decrim movement. You have Ann Arbor. There's some in Massachusetts. You're getting that to start to infiltrate into the minds of people. Michael Pollan's book,
Well, and his documentary too, which
yes, the Netflix documentary.
I think it helped normalize it for people when they watched people sit through a ceremony, right, and be like, okay, or through a therapy.
Yeah, and it makes it more tangible, and so that's what we're seeing, and I there's just a lot of hope. There's a lot of hope for it. The one thing that I do, another issue that I'm fighting though is a lot of people who come into this work, the psychedelic entheogen work, have trauma from religion. Mm-hmm. And so they're not really open to the idea of understanding this in a religious spiritual context. And their wording around it is very triggering for them. Church and God and religion. They'll accept the fact that they're having this experience. This experience is showing them a oneness, a connection. This experience is showing them trauma that they've forgotten about or events that they have forgotten about, but reframing it into a way that can be beneficial. And I asked them, where's this information coming from? I mean, what's this? Who are you communicating with?
Yeah.
And can you open up the idea that, this is the God of the Bible, the experience of the Bible that they refer to speaking to God. This is the same intelligence. This is the same higher authority that's being experienced. And can we use the words of our culture to explain this? I don't want people to be afraid of us. The people who experience these things are not hallucinating. We're not seeing hallucinations and trying to interpret them into some kind of a witchcraft understanding. These experiences are very much, I believe, especially, the experiences I've had, identify very much with the Bible stories. And so I use the word God. I believe I'm communicating with God. I believe this is my religion. This is my practice. I believe that this practice represents my church. And I think that as we learn to use those words in a way that communicates the meaning of what we're trying to share, not scaring people with, I was out tripping balls or something, and then I saw this, it's like that scares people. And I understand why. And I tell you, going back, there's no way I would have jumped into this had that been the presentation.
Yeah.
But I can tell you so sincerely, it saved my life. And I certainly believe Spirit was guiding the whole process and the whole time.
Well, and it certainly changed your life because your legal focus is different now, and you're, you've maybe even made peace with religion through it.
Well, thankfully I wasn't raised in a tight structure of a church, so I really didn't have religious trauma that way at all. So I didn't have anything to run away from. I was blessed with parents who were very open-minded that way, who shared with me various religious teachings and practices. My mother was very much also in the New Age movement with Wayne Dyer and open to self-help and creating that opportunity. But I really do see this as that it's a collection. I have a little Venn diagram I use where it's philosophy, religion, and science all coming together in a very sincere way. In my research, I found that the difference between religion and philosophy was that religion is based upon mysticism and belief, and philosophy is based upon logic and reason. And I'm like, well, but if you apply logic and reason to the entheogenic ceremonies, which is what I do, and you add the science that shows that these are things that are tapping into receptors in our brain, we are taking a God-given plant-based substance that is interacting with God-given receptors in our brain to have these experiences. It's all coming together for me. And then, and I've been, in my research recently, I also went back and really studied the origin of the First Amendment, the religious freedom. What is that really about? I also, there's a case out of Massachusetts, New Hampshire, that analyzed their state constitution, because RFRA, the Federal Religious Freedom Restoration Act, doesn't apply to states. If you're involved in the state charges, you have to look at the state constitution. But in most state constitutions address religious freedom. In Massachusetts and New Hampshire, they focused on basically it's the only restriction is do not disturb the peace and do not disturb someone else's practice. And it's because, and as you start to appreciate why that is, to appreciate the fact that we want people to explore this, because let's face it, humanity basically woke up on this planet, flying through a universe, having unknown awareness of where we came from, where we're going, where are we, why are we here, how are we supposed to interact with each other. And as we explore these questions, this is a religion. Religion is the exploration of these questions. And we need to understand them, because maybe through these explorations, we can find a way to live with each other peacefully, that we can end war, that we can find cooperation and helpfulness. Maybe in understanding where we are, a relationship with our Creator, as often given by some religions, this idea that we should all be helping each other, we should be helping the poor, we're helping the sick, and I think it comes through that understanding. We're also very excited. You mentioned the Utah case. The Utah case is an anomaly at this point, which I hope becomes very mainstream. In 2023, Bridger Jensen started a church, a psilocybin church. He invited the local police and the county authorities to come basically for an open house, and they refused. Despite his offer and despite his established legitimacy, his church was raided through a search warrant in 2024. They took his sacrament, the psilocybin, and they took his scripture for his church, his religion. And thankfully, he had a very competent attorney, apparently on retainer, because within 10 days, he ran to court and filed action against the county saying, "Give me back my mushrooms." The county decided to remand it into federal court because he raised a First Amendment issue or constitutional claims. And he went to a hearing in front of a federal judge in December of 24. And that judge heard testimony from Bridger, his assistant, 3 members of his church, found that they were sincerely practicing his religion that he acquired through his experiences with the psilocybin, and said, "Give him back his mushrooms." And it's a very beautiful case. And it's also, the understanding is that the judge came from a background of Native Americans use of peyote from a state level, some of the work she did at the state level. And so again, if you come from that understanding, that's what it fits into. If you can forget the fried egg and your brain on drugs, and you forget all that hysteria, and you hate, this isn't cannabis, it's not heroin, it's not crack, it's not cocaine.
Yeah.
These are substances that are inherently entheogens and calling for this connection. And so we're very excited about that case, and we're looking forward to seeing what happens and getting it established as the law of the land, frankly.
Thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing your passion and your love for this with us, and just the wealth of information that you have. It's really fascinating to listen to, and I learned some things, even though you and I talk fairly frequently.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you allowing me to do this. I've been working very quietly under in the shadows for a long time, and then just in the past couple of years, I'm trying to get the word out more. I've been asked to kind of share the word, and I'm still new to this and not sure how to do it. But I thank you for this platform and the work you're doing to invite people to talk about love and passion and what they're doing.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much.
Bye.